Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor.
Later in the pod, Lovett's interview with Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Ronan Farrow, the author of the new book, Catch and Kill.
Jordan, when I was introducing Ronan, I was like, how should I introduce you? And I couldn't figure out what to say. And Jordan after was like, he won a Pulitzer. Say that. But I didn't.
But you didn't.
But I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, well, of course. I'm always there for you, Ronan. We have a lot of news to talk about, first from the latest on impeachment to the disaster Donald Trump has caused in Syria to a preview of this week's Democratic presidential debate. Lots going on, guys. Lots going on. Speaking of the debate, it's going to change our schedule a bit this week. We'll have a post-debate pod on Wednesday with all four of us instead of our usual Thursday pod. And during the debate itself, you can follow along with us on our next edition of Group Thread, which you can find at youtube.com/crookedmedia. Lovett, how was your show this week?
Great, love it or leave it. Emily Heller, Shea Serrano, two returning champions, plus Beto O'Rourke stopped by and played Queen for a day. One of my favorite episodes ever.
Wow. You don't say that too often.
Well, you know, we've been
It's the biggest lie you've ever told on the show.
We've been slowly shifting the format, trying new things. The show is it felt very good. It felt very good.
Excellent. Finally, if you haven't yet already, you need to subscribe to Crooked Media's newest podcast, America Dissected, hosted by the brilliant Abdul El-Sayed. Each episode goes far beyond the headlines to explore different issues important to our health, and the one coming this week goes very deep on superbugs and the growing resistance to antibiotics.
6 feet
very
wide.
Scary.
You know, I know it sounds scary.
They're the size of a Chevy Nova.
But Abdul's like funny, and he has empathy for people in these situations. It's just really well done. He's a great host. Check it out.
It's good because, you know, our healthcare discussion in politics is all about insurance and coverage, and there's a million other topics in health that deserve attention. So he does that, which is great. All right, on to the news. Multiple officials who've worked in the Trump administration have chosen to defy the White House's obstruction of Congress by agreeing to testify as part of the House's impeachment inquiry into President Trump. On Friday, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, told lawmakers that there was a concerted campaign to remove her from her post that was based on, quote, unfounded and false claims by people with clearly questionable motives. Yeah, no shit. Today, Monday, Fiona Hill, Trump's former top Russia advisor, will testify that Rudy Giuliani and the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, conducted secret diplomacy to carry out Trump's scheme in Ukraine that included trying to oust Yovanovitch. And over the weekend, the Washington Post reported that Sondland himself will now offer testimony that's expected to confirm that Donald Trump traded a White House meeting for politically motivated investigations of his political opponent and add weight to the allegation that he also traded taxpayer-funded military assistance for those investigations as well.
Can I just say that something's occurred to me, and I just want to say it now before we move on, because I just want to say it. I just want to say it one time. Yovanovitch-hunt.
Title.
There we go.
Write it down, Michael.
Just wanted to say it one time. Make sure it was said.
Michael's too busy laughing to type.
Guys, get it together.
Get it together.
Everybody's inconsolable.
Tommy, what's the significance of these Trump officials offering testimony in defiance of the White House?
Well, I mean, Trump himself has been hanging a lot on Gordon Sondland's text that there was no quid pro quo. How dare you suggest that? What are you talking about? I'm summarizing, like Adam Schiff did at the hearing. But
like
now,
Shifty Schiff.
Like Shifty Schiff did. Now Gordon Sondland is telling Congress that the no quid pro quo line was just relaying what Trump told him and that he doesn't know the truth, and that clearly there was a quid pro quo, but there was not a corrupt one, which, you know, kind of undercuts their main argument.
It's fascinating philosophically to decide what you know, the difference between a corrupt quid pro quo and a non-corrupt quid pro quo. Just one other thing that's baked into this that I haven't seen many people note, that what Sondland said is, look, and again, I am paraphrasing, which is a treasonous offense, so everyone just be careful. Be careful out there. Paraphrasing is a crime. But
paraphrasing gets you the guillotine these days.
Yeah, it's yeah. But what Sondland said is basically, I don't know if it's true. It's just something Donald Trump told me.
Right.
And baked into that is the assumption that Donald Trump just doesn't tell the truth. And in any other administration, if a hack who worked for you said something like that, it would be a big story because What do you mean? You're saying the president's not telling the truth?
Yeah, I mean, what I got from this on the Sondland thing is Sondland is neither a Trump loyalist at this point, nor is he some kind of a hero. He is just a guy who got a pretty good lawyer who's giving him good advice, and he's trying to save his own ass. So, like,
He's a guy. Sorry.
In addition to what Lovett just said about, I don't know if President Trump was telling the truth. The other thing he said about, I don't know if it was a corrupt quid pro quo. He's saying that because he's like, yeah, no, I know that there was definitely a trade of a White House meeting for a statement from Ukraine that they were going to investigate Burisma. But I didn't make the connection between Burisma and Hunter Biden, even though those reports were public. So fine. If Sondland wants to pretend that he was just, in the dark this whole time, that's fine for him. But he has implicated Trump through this, or it's expected to implicate Trump through this testimony.
Rudy Giuliani is running around the world with a folder full of depositions and clips that he pitched to his personal journalist, what's his name, John Solomon, over at the Hill or whatever garbage publication he works for now, alleging this quid pro quo.
The Hill being the second most popular newspaper on Capitol Hill to bring to the toilet.
But like, it's not
Number one is roll call.
It's not credible that Sondland had not heard of these allegations about Hunter Biden and Burisma. Like, in the way they're going to try to muddy this up, I think, is like quid pro quos are at the heart of diplomacy, right?
Right.
You trade, you get a deliverable from some other country all the time to get a White House meeting. The problem here is the deliverable was a political favor for Donald Trump to attack his potential opponent, Joe Biden. Well, that is the definition of a corrupt quid pro quo.
Well, that's the point we were when we first were slowly learning about what had happened here. One of the first cautions being offered by those who were expert in this, looking at this, was to say, don't fall in the quid pro quo trap. It's wrong to solicit foreign interference, even if you don't have a quid to the pro quo, right? It's just soliciting foreign interference is wrong, regardless of whether or not that there's a quid pro quo. So the whether it's this idea that there's some non-corrupt version of a quid pro quo in which the thing you are getting is foreign interference is just not possible.
Yeah, and they're still ducking the issue of the hundreds of $millions of military aid to Ukraine. I mean, we know that was being delayed. It doesn't seem like it's a coincidence that it was right around this attempted extortion attempt of Ukraine. So
no, and Sondland's expected to say that it was possible that it was withheld for that reason. He's not. He's very at least in the reports of what his testimony might be. He is not going to say there was no withholding military assistance for. He's not going to say that there was no withholding military assistance for the political investigations. He's going to leave open the possibility.
To your point, John, Gordon Sondland is not a ride or die Trump guy. He was a Jeb Bush supporter who bought his way into this administration with a $1 million donation to the inauguration via four anonymous LLCs.
Well, I mean, this is, I think a lot of times we use as a shorthand like Trump loyalist, and maybe there are some people who would be willing to go down for Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is a
Scavino,
right? Well, but this is I like. It's worth thinking about. Like, Donald Trump is a toxic, noxious human being that is known to everyone, even his most ardent defenders. So Sondland, Scavino, we don't know where his story ends ultimately. But like Michael Cohen, right, considered to be one of the great Trump loyalists, Trump goons turns. Why? Because if you're the kind of person who will demonstrate loyalty to Donald Trump, it means you're the kind of person who will demonstrate loyalty to anyone. Sondland is not a Trump guy. He's a Sondland guy. Michael Cohen was not a Trump guy. He was a Michael Cohen guy. And the second these people no longer saw Donald Trump as a meal ticket, as a means to prestige, as a means to getting far beyond where their talents and skills ought to have allowed them to achieve, they're right off of that ship. Yeah. They're pushing women and children out of the way to get right on that boat with the other guy on
Look at
whatever.
Resistance Mooch out there tweeting away, right?
Right. Another perfect example. He was never a Trump guy. He was a Mooch guy.
Someday there's going to be an interview with Kellyanne Conway where she says, "What White House?"
Yeah, right.
I do think to that point, the other significance of the testimony this week of these current and former Trump officials is that despite the White House's best efforts to obstruct Congress, their own people who either work there now or used to work there are just not going to listen. And I think a couple people, Fiona Hill, Yovanovitch, Sondland coming forward, could lead many others to come forward and cooperate with this impeachment probe. And we also saw news over the weekend that there are more whistleblowers out there now, too. Yeah. And, of course, we don't know what they're going to say yet. We don't even know if it's about Ukraine or about something else. And of course, Congress has to vet these people because, you have to make sure that it's credible. But a lot of people coming forward now. People are playing ball here.
Yeah, credit to Adam Schiff for not writing 10 stern letters before getting to the subpoena. There is no downside to aggressive oversight in investigating Donald Trump, everywhere you possibly can. It's already paying dividends.
Yeah. How do you think the testimony this week, from what we've heard, is strengthening the overall case for impeachment?
That's such a good question, because the truth is we aren't really. I mean, I'm trying to think of anything that we've learned so far, or what we could learn that would be surprising. I feel like what we're learning is confirming our understanding about the breadth of this corruption. I'm
I think it's
interested.
the breadth. That's what I was going to say.
I think that to me is what we're kind of understanding, that this wasn't about one phone call, though we still have more to learn about that one phone call.
Exactly.
This was a concerted effort across our government to use the tools of American foreign policy and diplomacy for the purpose of Donald Trump's political ends. And he enlisted many figures in many parts of the government to do this. And with each passing day, the scandal becomes less and less spinnable for those trying to cordon it off, blame it on a paraphrase from Schiff or a whistleblower who didn't have firsthand knowledge, despite the fact that the rough transcript confirms it. It's getting harder and harder for them to find a boogeyman to attach as the source of all of the problems, because the problems are so broad, touching so many different parts of the government.
It was a conspiracy, right? It started, Trump said, and Giuliani, how do we get the Ukraine to help us slime the Bidens? Number one, we're going to fire the ambassador because she doesn't want any part of this. Number two, we're going to have Rudy and his goons conduct secret diplomacy so that the rest of the government doesn't find out. Number three, we're going to hold out the promise of a White House meeting as a carrot, and then we're going to withhold security assistance as the stick. It's a whole plan.
Right.
Way bigger than a phone call.
And it's also important to note that it was personally directed by Donald Trump. Gordon Sondland didn't call Rudy Giuliani before texting back, hey, no quid pro quo. What are you talking about? He called Donald Trump. He called the president of the United States. We also now know that two associates of Rudy Giuliani
we're gonna get
were
there.
illegally funneling Russian money to get a hack named Pete Sessions, one of the worst former members of Congress that you can imagine, to write a letter attacking our ambassador.
So to get to that, three of the people who helped the president carry out his Ukraine scheme are already in a bit of trouble. The New York Times has reported that Rudy Giuliani is under investigation by SDNY, the district attorney's office he once led, for potentially breaking foreign lobbying laws when he lobbied to get Ambassador Yovanovitch fired. The Times also notes that their investigation of Giuliani is, quote, tied to the case against two of his associates who were arrested this week on campaign finance-related charges, i.e., as Tommy mentioned, illegally funneling money to former Republican Congressman Pete Sessions in exchange for his help getting Yovanovitch fired. The two goons, named Lev Parnas and Igor Furman, once paid Giuliani through a business called, I'm not making this up, Fraud Guarantee, and were finally arrested.
Hey, that's fraud. You can take it to the bank.
Fraud Guarantee is what we're working with.
Not like
there.
these other fraud companies. All right, they'll leave you high and dry, but not us.
It is a fantastic name.
It's the best. It's too perfect.
If it says Igor, it's guaranteed.
You turn in a script with that business name and it gets sent back. Give me a break. No one's believing that.
And the reason that they were arrested before the full investigation of Giuliani and the rest of them are complete is because they were trying to flee the country at Dulles Airport.
One-way tickets to Vienna. I don't know why Vienna makes it more corruptish sounding. There's something it's very 90s action movie.
Yes.
To go to Vienna, right? It's just it's just a little bit, it's not Rome, It's not Paris, it's Vienna.
So
right? A little off the beaten trail.
Well, also, we found out that Rudy was supposed to go to Vienna as well.
Maybe they wanted to take in a
and then last minute decided not to join his pals in Vienna.
Take in a quick walk
they were
into that
pinched.
cathedral.
I mean, these goons...
Little opera or something?
These goons set up an energy company just to funnel money to Republican political candidates. They fired over $325,000 to a pro-Trump super PAC. They made $630,000 worth of donations to federal Republican candidates and PACs in 2016. I mean, these guys were just plowing massive amounts of money into the GOP establishment, and what a surprise. It opened every door imaginable, including the got them access to George H.W. Bush's funeral with Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, what a weird thing
What a
to bring.
weird thing to do.
What a weird thing to
bring
buy
your
access
corrupt
to.
goons to a funeral.
I gotta say, again, it's not the most important piece of this story, but a great deal of what's going on in this country does have to do with the fact that Rudy Giuliani is a lonely man struggling with getting older and divorce, and the fact that he brought these two, I don't know what you'd call them, friends, accomplices. The fact that he brought his two friends / accomplices to a state funeral, I think, is a pretty interesting.
Interesting's a good word for it.
Exactly.
Choice.
But they also went to an 8-person dinner with Trump where they talked about the 2018 midterms and Ukraine-U.S. relations. He was like all up in the Trump business.
Which is amazing because when Trump was asked about it, he did the Kiki Palmer. Sorry to this man. I don't know who these people are. Maybe he did. Maybe I took a picture with them, but I take a picture with everyone. No, buddy. You did way more than take a picture with them. You had fucking dinner with them, and you talked about Ukraine policy. I mean, obviously, it's satisfying to watch Rudy potentially get in trouble, to watch these goons go down. How does this connect, if at all, to sort of this larger impeachment inquiry?
Well, first of all, I think we're still learning, actually, what exactly. I mean, this is approaching a kind of this is approaching a point after which things start to get complicated and hard to understand. Like right now, it's pretty fucking simple. You laid it out. Like, this is the corruption that we're talking about. This is the abuse of power we're talking about. But of course, as with all things Trump, there are tangled webs of connection to other goons, other attempts to subvert our democracy, other criminal enterprises.
Everyone's trying to get their beak wet around Trump, right? So it's like there's stuff like we're trying to fire the ambassador and change policy and beat Joe Biden, but there's also like everyone wants to make money.
Yeah, but I got an oil thing going on over here that I can maybe just like
right. Everyone's got their side hustle, which really complicates the story.
Right, and so we'll I think find out more. I mean, Rudy Giuliani's involvement in all this is strange. Like, who's paying Rudy Giuliani? I think is an important question we don't know the answer to yet. So so these two guys getting arrested at Dulles, I don't think it made Donald Trump's life better. Certainly didn't make Rudy's life better, but I honestly think we're still watching the facts of that sort of become revealed to us.
Right. I mean, look, I don't want to do whataboutism, but those who are saying that it was inappropriate for Hunter Biden to seek foreign deals because he was politically connected should also ask themselves, why are you hiring Rudy Giuliani to do literally anything for you? He doesn't appear to be a great lawyer. We know he's not a good spokesman. He peddles himself as a cybersecurity expert while texting in like 48-point font. Like
with anyone.
With literally anyone.
Again, to my loneliness point, you can text Rudy. You can do it.
Brian Beutler was talking with him over the weekend, I believe.
Yeah, Brian broke some news. A couple other reporters were texting with him. It was and some of them were making jokes like Tally 11 was saying like, "Hey Rudy, tell me about the crimes, the big crimes, the little crimes, all the crimes," and he's like, "I didn't do any crimes."
I'm glad Brian texted Rudy. I mean, what a world. Brian texted Rudy saying, "Hey, has Trump ever raised the issue? Have you ever discussed a pardon with Trump or anyone related to him?" Which I'm glad he asked, because I do think that Trump pardons Rudy was a really cool bet you could have made. In the pool in like 2017, that would have been like giving you really good odds. They probably should have taken.
Well, let me ask you guys. So Trump was first asked about Rudy when the news broke that his goons were pinched and he's under investigation on Friday. And they asked if Rudy still works for him. And Trump said, quote, "I don't know. I haven't spoken to Rudy. He has been my attorney." And then a few days later, he's eating lunch with Rudy and tweeting his support for him. Why do you think he's sticking with him? What are your theories on this?
It's interesting.
I don't know.
First of all, who knows what's rattling around in that fucking Swiss cheese, crime-addled, narcissism-addled rotunda of a brain. But the, empty. But Swiss. I'm sorry, but let me say it again because it was so stupid. Just incredibly dumb. Who knows what Trump thinks he means? I do think a lot of times when Trump is asked a question, his sort of id kicks in, and I imagine there's a part of him that's thinking, "I've never paid Rudy, so he's just a guy I get advice from. He's going around calling me his lawyer. I am not in charge of that." So there's a little bit of like keeping Rudy at arm's length. I do think it will not be surprising to me if a couple months from now he's like, "Yeah, Rudy, I love the guy, but." I mean, my lawyer, I don't know. He went on TV on Fox News, made some trouble. I don't know why everyone's getting in I don't talk to the guy once in a long while. So I think he's leaving himself an exit strategy when Rudy gets hauled off to the clink.
Yeah, I think that Trump would throw Don Jr. under the bus if it got him out of trouble. But you have to assume that Rudy knows an awful lot of information
Yeah.
that would be
That's a good point.
problematic in the long run for Mr. Trump. So
Keep him inside the tent.
that's my guess.
All right. I want to turn to the Middle East, where Trump's decision to give his authoritarian counterpart in Turkey the green light to invade northern Syria has already led to the deaths of innocent civilians, executions of our Kurdish allies, and the escape of ISIS fighters and their families, who raised the ISIS flag again over parts of northern Syria. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Mark Esper announced on Sunday that the U.S. would be withdrawing nearly all of its forces from northern Syria, while Kurdish forces reached a deal to get troop support from a Syrian government backed by Russia and Iran. On Sunday, Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "The Kurds in Turkey have been fighting for many years. Others may want to come in and fight for one side or the other. Let them." Tommy, can you talk about the consequences of Trump's decision here?
Sure. I mean, it is true that the Kurds and the Turks have been fighting for many years, but I think the important point is they were not for several years in that region of Syria because we were working with them to take out ISIS. And the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, of which this Kurdish militia makes up the bulk of the main fighters, have been our partner working hand in glove to take out ISIS in northern Syria for several years. The campaign started under Obama, and President Trump carried it on, to his credit, I would say. And it was incredibly effective. The Kurds are good fighters, and we have supported them. There was an international coalition of about 80 countries, I believe, also working with them to try to ensure that the people fighting ISIS were not just Kurdish, so it was more multi-sectarian. There were Arab fighters as well. And now we have pulled our guys from that region. It sounds like we're going to pull all 1,000 U.S. troops in northern Syria from the country, maybe put them in Iraq. And now they're going to have to fight on two fronts. They're going to have ISIS on one side, and they're going to have the second biggest military in NATO, Turkey, fighting them from the other side. And you have these Turkish-backed militia groups that at times are full of extremists who are just literally indiscriminately murdering people on the side of the road. And we know that because they're releasing cell phone videos of it. So our closest allies in the region are getting slaughtered.
One of the excuses that seems to be emerging from the White House and from Donald Trump is Erdogan was going to do this no matter what, and we really couldn't have stopped him. All we could have done is just get out of his way. Can you talk about why that is bullshit, or do you think it's bullshit?
It's true that Erdogan views a lot of these Kurdish fighters as associated with a group in Turkey called the PKK. And the PKK has been fighting for an autonomous Kurdish state for several decades. The Kurds, there's like 30 or 40 million Kurds in the world. Most of them live in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and they were promised a Kurdish state after World War I. They never got it, and they want one. So Erdogan views them as an enemy. They're designated as a terrorist group in Turkey and I believe in the U.S. But our presence in that region was holding off a Turkish offensive to take out these guys. And what Trump basically did was he let himself get browbeaten by Erdogan over and over again. I mean, Axios reported that he would sort of listen to Erdogan talk about how he wanted to conduct this military operation and be like, well, Trump would say, well, if you do, you now own it. You own ISIS. You own all the problems. And he assumed that that was enough to convince Erdogan not to do it. And then this time Erdogan called his bluff and just rolled his guys in.
But it seems like the U.S. president, right, and Turkey's theoretically a NATO ally, could have said to Erdogan, "Don't do this."
Yeah, I want to be clear, right? It's an excuse.
Right, that's what I want. Yeah.
A lot of people are drawing comparisons to Obama pulling all troops out of Iraq or various other points in history, and it's like fine if you want to criticize those things, but what happened here is Erdogan said, "I want to conduct a military option to take these guys out." Trump didn't just say, "No, there will be massive consequences for you if you do so." He just let him do it.
Right.
He just caved to the guy.
Can you talk about the effects on our soldiers, too? Because we're getting some reports of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing a lot of reports that the Special Forces guys in particular who are fighting hand in glove with them feel just horrible about this. I mean, imagine working with some Kurdish fighters one day to enable a counter-ISIS campaign. I'm sure they were friends with them, and then the next day you were literally not allowed under the rules of engagement to help them as they come under attack. By the way, you have artillery rounds landing like a couple hundred yards from our guys in an effort to intimidate us further out of the region.
Unbelievable. What are the options now? What can we do can you put this back in a box? Probably not. I know that some stuff's going on in Congress.
It sounds like Lindsey Graham is leading the charge for sanctions on Turkey. I hope that happens. But I don't know how sanctions now prevents this from continuing.
And we still look, and I think the one way this connects to sort of this larger impeachment inquiry and Trump's abuse of power is once again we are left wondering whether Trump's foreign policy decision about our national security was made because he thought it was in the best interest of the country, or was made for personal, political, financial reasons. You know, he's talked before about how he has a conflict of interest in Turkey because there's Trump towers there, or that, you know, that's one financial possible reason. There's also political reasons, right? Like Trump in his mind somehow thinks this is, you know, he equates getting out of the way with ending endless wars, right? He thinks that's a political talking point, which is bullshit since our troops aren't actually coming home as a result of this decision. They're just being moved elsewhere, and like you said, Tom, you may be put in harm's way. So it does fit a pattern of Trump's abuse of power.
Yeah, I mean, we're once again left in the situation where we don't know what was said on the call, but it's hard to come up with an understanding of what's been happening without corruption as being one of the explanations, especially when he's, when there are those, when he's trying to make this argument on Twitter and elsewhere that, he was against endless wars. This is part of his strategy from the beginning, while at the same time promising in a really kind of ugly way, vulgar way, American protection via our armed forces for Saudi Arabia. So there's this contradiction baked into all of this, that there's any claim to an ideology is immediately refuted, any claim to a strategy is immediately refuted. The only thing that is left is a deeply strange phone call that caused this about face in which Donald Trump has personal vested financial interests in what happens in Turkey.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about 2020. On Tuesday, the New York Times and CNN will host the fourth Democratic primary debate in Westerville, Ohio. It will be the most crowded presidential primary debate stage in history, with 12 candidates facing off in one night. Everyone who was there at the last debate, plus Tulsi Gabbard, and for the first time, Tom Steyer.
Not since Dick Gephardt dined alone. Have so many. I don't know.
What?
I've never been cut it. I was trying to make a joke about it. Doesn't matter.
In advance of the debate, CBS released a series of early state polls that show a three-way tie for first in Iowa between Biden, Warren, and Sanders at 21-22%, with Pete Buttigieg in fourth at 14%. In New Hampshire, Warren's ahead of Biden by 32-24%, and Biden is ahead of Warren in South Carolina by 43-18%. Guys, the debate is 3 hours with 12 candidates, only 3 of whom are polling in double digits in the early contests, 4 in Iowa. How does that change the dynamic? What's the dynamic of this debate?
First of all, one thing people are not paying enough attention to is that the stage does slowly get smaller as the night progresses. And so you have to, not only do you have to debate, you have to slowly build a bit of a buttress to protect yourself, keep yourself on the dais.
There's a moat, right?
Yeah, it's a moat. People will be
alligators.
falling out. A lot of people think that Beto might try to throw Buttigieg in the moat as his move to create some more relevance, but again, we don't know. You want a serious answer?
Tommy, did you want to answer? Didn't you want to give a real answer?
What was the question?
It was just like, how does this change the dynamic with this many candidates? And there's 3 who are, there's 3 who are polling in double digits right now, but there's 9 more on stage who are not. I guess Pete is in Iowa. What do you do in a 12-person debate?
I just think it sort of makes the strategy a little more unpredictable. I mean, it seems like, so there's some reporting. Obviously, we spent like a couple weeks talking about Joe Biden, his family, what he did or didn't do in Ukraine. It seems like the other candidates so far have taken a tack where they think that it helps them politically to defend Joe Biden from unfair attacks from the president. I think that's probably true for the main candidates. I don't know if that's true for Tom Steyer or Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was planning to boycott the debate that she had made like a couple days ago. Yeah. So I don't really know what these guys are going to do. It also, it probably makes it less likely that there's a focused discussion about Elizabeth Warren. Some people are starting to obliquely criticize her, right? Pete called her evasive about how to pay for her health care plan. In an interview with Snapchat's Peter Hamby, he criticized her campaign fundraising strategy. Biden's been out there saying, we don't need just plans, we need a president. But I don't know if they will make those attacks on stage because, one, you don't know if they'll get the chance to, or if they'll see it as politically advantageous.
Yeah, it's hard to see a debate with 12 human beings standing all side by side as having really much of an opportunity for anyone to change the fundamental dynamics of the race, one in which there are kind of three steady frontrunners. I mean, there's been polls out showing that Elizabeth Warren's been grabbing a little bit, not from Biden, from Bernie, but from a little bit from some of the other candidates.
Right.
So I think I don't know what's going to happen. We have to see what actually plays out. But, you go into this thinking, hard to imagine how this changes the dynamic, which means it rewards the frontrunners and not those who are trying to vie for a little bit more attention because it'll be hard to get. The other piece of this, I've been thinking about actually since we talked to Cyrus Habib in Seattle, which is he made the point that this is going to be the first debate we'll have had since impeachment really began in earnest. And I am just, it's going to be such a big part of the race in 2020, how we deal with how the relationship of these campaigns to Donald Trump, to the investigations taking place in Congress. So I'm really interested in how they strike that balance, how they offer a positive case set against the negative case being currently crafted in Congress.
I think that speaking time is such a challenge here, and like you said, I don't think this setup is good for any of the candidates except maybe Elizabeth Warren, because like we're going to talk even more about the all the different attacks that are being previewed upon her, and maybe Biden too. But like I think for some of these candidates who haven't qualified for the November debate yet, who at this point on the stage are Beto, Klobuchar, Castro, and Tulsi Gabbard. It becomes a, this is it moment. Like you've got to, if you don't start getting better polling between now and when the deadline is to qualify for the November debate, then you're like Michael Bennet and Steve Bullock and some of these people we haven't been talking about for weeks because they didn't make the last debate. And so I think it's really hard. So we had a debate 2 debates ago that was fairly nasty. Then the last debate was a pretty collegial affair. And I'm wondering now, even though there's a lot of candidates on that stage, if either people who haven't made the November debate or people who are sort of struggling in that second tier and sort of in danger of falling into a third tier, like a Kamala Harris, doesn't start getting a little feisty with the other candidates to try to break out.
I'm not being critical. Look, the DNC has taken plenty of shit for all these debate decisions, and I don't envy them because I don't think there's any decision that would have satisfied everybody, though I'm not super happy about 12 people on a stage. I will say one of the unintended consequences of this kind of objective, slow winnowing through these debates is I don't really remember from previous primaries feeling as though each debate was like a level in a game to try to get to the next debate.
Big boss.
Like we're now at debate 4-3, and then, the next debate is the water one, And I just think it's unfortunate that that's where we're at and that there are so many candidates that a few of them are just viewing this as a place like Tremors, where you had to use a little stick to get from big rock to big rock to avoid the monsters coming up.
I love that movie.
And like this is like they're just trying to get to the next rock.
It was a good movie.
It's a great movie.
So let's talk a little bit about, and Tommy, you started to do this, some of the lines of attack that the other candidates have been previewing against Warren. Right now, it does seem a little kitchen sink like. There doesn't seem to be. I think you're in danger as a candidate when everyone else is sort of and the media too is sort of coalescing around one major weakness in your campaign. I think the issue right now for everyone testing lines of attack on Warren is it's a little bit all over the place. So you've seen the Medicare one come up a bunch. Pete has been doing that. Like you said, she said she's been evasive on the taxes answer. Biden obviously hit her for that. But then, as you said, Pete said to Hamby in that Snapchat interview, we're going up against the sitting president of the United States. We're not going to beat him with pocket change. This is in response to Elizabeth Warren's decision or announcement that she's not going to do these high-dollar fundraisers in the general election, which I don't know about that one, guys.
I can't imagine an attack Elizabeth Warren is not more likely to absorb into her suit and then fire back out.
Yeah.
I mean, that is John Delaney level bad, because it's like I can write that sentence right now. Now, there are people on this stage who think we need to go to the millionaires and billionaires to defeat Donald Trump, but I'm not going to rely on them. I'm going to rely on you. Applause, 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 nomination.
Well, also,
it's like, what are we doing?
But there's even, you can make the moral case, right, for like we shouldn't be relying on billionaires and millionaires. We should be relying on grassroots donations. And then you'll get some Democrats and some voters to say, yeah, but we don't want to unilaterally disarm. We've got to beat Trump, and so whatever it takes to beat him. And even then, though, Elizabeth Warren can turn to Pete Buttigieg and be like, you know what? I outraised you.
That's also true.
You relied on the millionaires and billionaires, and I only relied on grassroots fundraising. And I raised more money than you, and so did Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, she can say, "Hey, I raised 24.6 million. Bernie raised 25." I mean, I think Pete's strength and his weakness is that he's able to provide political analysis in a very interesting way, but in a very interesting way. But it can make you sound like a pundit, and I doubt this was a prepared line. Like, I don't think if you were looking at a bunch of polling about potential attacks on Elizabeth Warren, her inability to get big checks from big donors is very high on the list in a Democratic primary. But it's like when you step back and you do, analysis of a race when you're a candidate, you always get into trouble. It happened to Obama. It's happened to countless candidates.
It's also worth remembering, too, that some of the comments that have gotten candidates into the most trouble, whether it's deplorables, we all remember that.
Wait, what was that?
It was a basket of deplorables.
Right.
It was very bad. Mitt Romney, 47%. Barack Obama, cling to guns and religion. Those were all things said at fundraisers with wealthy donors.
Always.
Look, it's weird to me, Pete's strategy over the last couple of weeks. He's clearly trying to stake out territory as a more, as people have telegraphed to reporters, the more electable progressive, right? And so, in a way I understand that, but I think if that's going to be your move, it has to have been your move from the get-go and not once you fell behind in the polls and then you feel like you need to catch up, because it looks a little, it risks looking a little bit more calculated. And here's the thing. Pete started off this campaign as a very bold generational candidate, which I liked. He talked about the Electoral College. He talked about the Supreme Court reform, right? Like he was talking about democracy reform. That's what got people to like Pete. That's why I think he was such an attractive candidate, and frankly still can be. But I worry for him. Sort of like, I know someone's told him, look, at some point you've got to draw contrasts if you're gonna get ahead of these people. And I think the Medicare argument is totally fair. You can disagree with them or not, but challenging other candidates on policy is completely fair. Some of the other stuff has either seemed a bit more vague or a little off, like the fundraising thing.
I would just say the counterpoint to that is that CBS tracking poll that you mentioned early on has Pete now at 14% in Iowa, which is a pretty decent place to be, I would argue, right about now. Look, Warren's campaign is going very well for her, right? I don't think anyone could argue that. But there is maybe some concern in the back of people's heads, like, is she surging too early?
Yeah.
Do you want to be shot at this early? Pete in 14th place with a ton of money, a ton of organizing. He's building a big, strong, smart team in Iowa. Like, you could argue he's very well positioned.
I do think one of the challenges for all the candidates trying to create a contrast with Elizabeth Warren is that it is hard to do two things: create a contrast with Elizabeth Warren and do it while you look good.
Yeah.
I think it is not.
It's a tough balance.
It is easier actually to do it with some of the other candidates. It is, I think, easier to do it with Joe Biden, honestly, because I think he's taken some more moderate positions. So you can kind of argue you're bolder, and you can argue for generational change. You can make all kinds of arguments in which you are making a case against Washington, right? But with Elizabeth Warren, I think, look, there's the conversation that happens on television. There's the conversation that people say, when there aren't cameras. And I do think that there's this, the conversation is she too far to the left? Is she electable, right? That is undergirding so much of this conversation. But for Pete Buttigieg, who wants to say, I don't think she's electable and I think she's too far left, but he can't say it because it makes you sound very small and it makes you sound negative and like you're trimming your sails. And so
the other thing is, if you're going to say she's too left, you have to say, okay, well, which policies do you disagree? And he's got them. And like I said, I think the Medicare for All argument for him is totally fair. He can say she's further to left than me on Medicare for All. I believe in this plan, and that's that. I think that's a totally fair argument. I think when you start getting into more vague things, right? Like he also said, I worry about a tone being set up where it almost seems like fighting is the point. We need to find a way to bring Americans back together. I do think there is a hunger out there in the electorate, right? He's going to tap into something where there's a lot of people who are sick of political warfare and do want the country to come back together. But the challenge there is someone's going to say, what do you mean by that? What specifically do you mean by that? And then you have to
what and again, like, I just think of if I was a speechwriter trying to deal with that in context, I would relish the opportunity to write a riff about, like, they think we shouldn't fight so hard. Well, I think we should fight against this, and I think we should fight against. It's just these are the crux of the argument. I think is not very it's not conducive to looking good while you're conveying it. And also, by the way, like the other PCs, anyway, that's it.
I just think the mood of the electorate is clearly that they want someone who can beat Donald Trump. That is their first, second, and third concern. I'm not sure we're at the come on, everybody, let's get along part of the campaign. We might get there when things get actually vicious. But right now, like, people are framing Bernie saying Elizabeth Warren is a capitalist through and through, and I'm not, as an attack. It is that is not an attack. It is so ridiculous, right? Everyone's desperate for Bernie to attack her, and he doesn't want to do it.
I also, by the way, don't know if Bernie Sanders saying, all right, I'm going to finally draw a contrast with Elizabeth Warren, and it's that she's a capitalist and I'm not, is going to work for him that well. Again, for Bernie, this is all about, like, you saw this in the CBS tracking polls. Bernie Sanders supporters are probably more enthusiastic, or at least they are more enthusiastic according to these polls, than almost any other candidate. They're sticking with them. So when you ask people, like, are you definitely going to vote for this person, his numbers are higher than either Warren's or Biden's. So he's got his base. The question for Bernie, though, has always been, can you expand on that base? And I don't know if saying, well, she said she's a capitalist and I'm not, is going to get you there.
Well, I also just think it was the answer to the question. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think it's an honest view of it, which is that, yeah, I know some people think we're the lefties, but there's actually an important distinction here. I am a democratic socialist. She has embraced capitalism and wants to make her solutions fit within capitalism. I think that makes her that ultimately redounds to her benefit to have that be a contrast that's made, but I think Bernie views it as just an honest rendering of his politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other big thing for Bernie at this debate is simple as sort of how does he look, right? I mean, he had a pretty serious health scare. He had a heart attack. He's clearly recovered. He's doing interviews. He's out, Skyping into events and things. But we know that concern about age has shown up in some of these polls. Normally, it's more often been in a discussion about Joe Biden, I think probably in part because Bernie Sanders had such a vigorous schedule and was doing 4 rallies a day and was like constantly out there. And it seems like he's going to scale that back a little bit, although what that means seems to be in debate. But, I think at the last debate, he didn't look well. And I think they said he had a cold or he was feeling sick. I wonder if that was the whole story, and maybe some of these health concerns were bubbling up for longer, and he seemed to suggest as much. So I do think that's going to be a big question at this debate is, like, is he recovered? Can he get back out there? Do people look at him and think, all right, that guy's going to kick Donald Trump's ass? Because that's all they want.
Yeah, I imagine in debate prep right now, the only thing they're trying to drill into Bernie is energy. I bet he's, Bernie can be quite funny. He has a dry sense of humor at times, I bet he'll try to do that. I bet he won't be as yelly, right? Because I think I don't know. I think energy and will be the
best thing he could do is probably put Julian Castro on his shoulders, just to send the right signal, maybe grab, get Klobuchar up there too.
But we're also seeing were you about to go to this Beto Pete thing?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No.
You're also seeing like some of the candidates ranking lower in the polls start to go after each other a bit. I mean, in that same interview with Peter Hamby on Snapchat, Mayor Pete criticized Beto O'Rourke.
Oh, yeah.
Beto O'Rourke has fired back this morning, saying Pete can belittle the grassroots. He can call buybacks a shiny object. This is a debate about gun buybacks as a policy. He can say whatever he wants, but guns kill 40,000 people a year. Those people deserve action. I'll be fighting for them. So, that's a pretty hard shot for this primary.
And Booker jumped in, too.
Yeah, Cory Booker did, too. I mean, he's cared about the gun issues for a long time.
Yeah, because Pete called buybacks confiscation, which is what, how Republicans...
The NRA would say.
What Republicans talk about.
It actually reminds me a little bit of, 2008. There was this moment where... Maybe I'm thinking of 2004. I'm old. But that when it was about John Edwards, and there was a series of stories saying John Edwards is annoying all the other candidates. He's the other candidate's least favorite candidate. Do you remember this?
No.
And they pointed to a bunch of these kinds of things. And I do think Pete is when Beto was asked about Pete, at first he just started. I'm sorry, let me say this. When Beto was asked about Pete, we've made fun of it all the time, but candidates tend to not invoke each other's name in the response when the candidate's name has been made clear before, so that doesn't sound as harsh. But nobody was stopping Beto from saying, when Mayor Pete says this, here's why it's wrong,
Yeah, I guess I'm most interested in this debate to see whether Pete is as feisty on stage as he's been about the other candidates to reporters and in some speeches. How Warren, Dan made this point last week, how Warren handles these attacks if they come, because she has led a fairly charmed race for the last couple of months in terms of, every debate you think, okay, this is the debate where they're going to someone's going to challenge Warren, and it doesn't happen, and she just moves on. And I think if I was the Warren campaign, I'd almost want the challenge because, I think people who support Warren should want the challenge too. Like, if she's going to go up against Trump, it's going to be the most miserable, fucking dirty campaign we've ever seen. And people are going to need to see, can she take a punch? And the Democratic primary is a good place to do that. The other thing I'm interested in is, this is, you mentioned this, Tommy, this is Biden's first debate since Ukraine. And I wonder, and of course, it's CNN and the New York Times. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. We were saying this, Lovett, if like the first question is going to be about Hunter Biden. How does he handle this?
Especially because Hunter is going to have done the injury that day.
Right.
It's in the news. It's going to be.
How does Biden handle Hunter? How should he handle Hunter, do you guys think? And do you think the other candidates will stay, away from this topic? Or if they're asked about it, at least they'll continue to defend Joe Biden?
Well, it seems like the campaign has started to roll out tools for Biden to use to handle this, right? So we know that Hunter Biden is stepping down from the Burisma board. He promised not to do any foreign work if his dad is president. And then Biden gave a speech recently and rolled out a policy where he said no one in his family or anyone associated with him will be involved in any foreign operation whatsoever, period, end of story. That's a quote. So they're trying to lay out sort of an ethics lobbying reform policy that is attempted to, I think, kind of cauterize the wound and undo the damage going forward. What I'd love to see Biden do, and maybe this is a bridge too far for a candidate, is say, hey, if you're worried about the families of presidential candidates making money off of their dad, why don't we look at Ivanka Trump's trademarks from China? Why don't we look at Jared Kushner's sister hawking visas for $500,000 a pop? Why don't we look at Tweedledum and Tweedledummer, Don and Eric, flying around the world, taking meetings, going to major rallies with their dad, and running the business that was supposed to be walled off. Like, everything. Remember that press conference around the emoluments clause early on before he took office, where they had like a stack of blank paper and they pretended this is a real policy? It's all bullshit. And we've just moved on because the fucking secretary of the Department of Homeland Security resigned on Friday, and it's the 20th biggest story of the weekend.
Forgot about that.
You know what I mean? It's like we're living in La La Land here, where there's lots of like ready-made attacks for Biden.
I do think that's true. That's exactly what I think he should say. I do also think I think the other candidates, I don't think there's very much equity in trying to make hay out of this, because I think the damage to Joe Biden is kind of doing itself, honestly, and you adding to it won't help. I do think, though, that if I were thinking about what kind of question to ask, the question I would ask is, does the fact that you've announced this policy tell you that there was something wrong with the conduct that happened before? And whether or not, now, do I believe that it's fair that that's become the focus of the campaign? Of course not. But I do think that is the kind of question Joe Biden has to dispense with, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has to dispense with it in this campaign, in this debate.
I have to imagine they're prepping for that very question right now. Have to. I think, Tommy, he should absolutely do the Trump children attack as a response to this, because if he doesn't, I think it is a fantastic opportunity for one of the other candidates. And Pete actually did this. Pete on Jake on Tapper's show Sunday defended Biden by then going after the Trump children, and it was a fantastic answer by Pete Buttigieg. And if you're one of the other candidates and you defend Joe Biden and then go after the Trump children, you get points for defending Joe Biden, and you get points for being tough on Trump.
Yep. Yes, the worst thing that could happen to Joe Biden in this debate is somebody says, "Don't worry, Joe, I'll take care of it," and push Joe behind him to have Joe behind him while they do the fight. I think that is the worst thing that could happen to Joe Biden.
I thought you and Dan talked about this at length on a recent episode, and you guys accurately described how sensitive this clearly is for Joe Biden. It's not just an attack on his son who's had some challenges over the years, some of them very public, but also, it's a family that has dealt with just enormous grief in losing Beau Biden and a whole host of other things throughout his career. So, God knows what kind of mental state he is in to be able to deal with these things at a debate, or, throw more kids into the political arena as punching bags. But I do think that Jared and Ivanka are different because they work in the White House and they're still making tons of money. Like $82 million last year, I think, was one report I saw.
Yeah.
And then Don and Eric are clearly part of the campaign.
Yeah, they're just 11 Igor waiting to happen. But the and you're exactly right about that, Tommy, and about the kind of whatever there's a human story behind this, but it almost is beside the point, because we don't look. look, Donald Trump is going to gin up a set of attacks on whoever our nominee is, whoever it is. But we now know what the Biden one is, right? And if Joe Biden wants to be the nominee of this party, he needs to win this argument, and it's going to be tomorrow night.
I will say I watched, I hadn't seen it, some clips of the speech Biden gave last week where he finally called for impeachment. And Joe Biden was quite good in that speech. He was sharp. And if he brings that kind of argument to the debate, then I think he will do himself some good. But he has to.
I'm glad they got there. I mean, the argument you were hearing from Team Biden was that Trump deserved due process around impeachment, and he wasn't going to call for him to be impeached, which I just think is
not great.
Sort of a misread of the impeachment process generally, right? It's not a court of law.
Just thought
it's a political decision. You're not voting.
Bad politics. Bad politics. Also, just I don't actually agree. Like,
I don't.
You uphold our standards by upholding our standards. It's also just one other small point about this, which is, like I want to see Biden do that in the debate and crush this issue, because if he's going to be the nominee, he has to. But it's also, I think, to our larger point, like this debate may not change the dynamic of this race. And I think one of the challenges we've seen for Joe Biden is that it did take him so long to come to the microphone and deal with this issue. And I think so it's not just about this debate, it's about moving forward. Do they understand that Donald Trump is for all his idiocy and chaos, he is relentless, creative, and will continue to be so.
All right. When we come back, we will have Lovett's interview with Ronan Farrow. Thanks to Ronan for joining us.